Today, I will tell you a story I never thought I would share, a story of betrayal so cold it chills my bones even now. I can still hear the voice of my daughter-in-law whispering near my ear, her lips curved into a cruel smile as she pushed me toward the edge. "Enjoy the waves, Grandma." My son stood beside her, his face as still as stone, his eyes refusing to meet mine. They thought my $2 million fortune was already theirs, that my life was a price they were willing to pay. But what they never expected was that when they returned home, I would be waiting for them, holding the one thing they dreaded most. Remember to like this story, subscribe, and join me in this journey of Grandma life stories, where every twist cuts deep and every ending leaves a mark on the soul. My name is Emily Carter. I am 63 years old, and just a few weeks ago, I was recovering from surgery on my knee. I was still learning how to walk without wincing, still grateful for every step that did not sting. Life after surgery was supposed to be quiet, a time to heal, a time to appreciate simple things like the warmth of tea or the softness of sunlight spilling through the curtains. Yet nothing in my life prepared me for the day my son Ethan and his wife Clara invited me to join them on a celebration cruise. It was Ethan who called me that morning. His voice, uncharacteristically warm, said, "Mom, Clara and I have been thinking. You've been through so much. We'd love to take you out on the water, just the three of us. A little toast to your recovery." For a moment, my heart softened. I missed him. I missed the days when I was the center of his world, when he would run to me with scraped knees and wide eyes seeking comfort. Clara's presence over the years had built a wall between us, but his words sounded genuine, and I wanted to believe. When I arrived at the marina, the yacht gleamed like a jewel against the afternoon sun. Clara stood on deck in a cream blouse, her posture graceful, her smile polished. She held out a flute of champagne as I stepped carefully aboard. "To your health, Emily," she said, her tone sweet, but her eyes sharp as glass. Ethan put an arm around my shoulder, squeezing just enough to remind me of the boy I had raised. "You look good, Mom. Dad would be proud." For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to believe this was real. We moved across the open water, the coastline shrinking behind us. The air smelled of salt and freedom. Clara poured more champagne, her laughter ringing a little too loud. She spoke of renovations they wanted to make, travel plans they had, all spoken with the ease of someone who already owned the future. Ethan nodded along, his hand resting lightly on hers. They looked like the perfect couple, united in ambition, in appearance, in their sense of control. I sipped slowly, letting the cold fizz touch my tongue. My navy blue dress clung gently in the breeze. The same dress my late husband Thomas had always said brought out my eyes. I wore it that day because I wanted to feel strong, to carry him with me in spirit. Sitting there on the deck, surrounded by glittering waves, I felt for a moment like I was part of their life again, part of their family. But beneath that fragile sense of belonging was something else. A silence, a heaviness in Ethan's gaze that unsettled me. He looked at me the way a man looks at a ledger, calculating, measuring. Clara's smile never faltered, but her eyes kept darting toward my glass, toward my hands, toward the way I steadied myself on the railing. I told myself not to think too much, not to imagine ghosts where there were none. After all, who suspects their own child of treachery? I reminded myself of something I had thought once, long ago, on the happiest day of my life. On the day of my wedding, I had whispered to myself that this was the moment I was seen, truly seen, and allowed to live as my most authentic self. That memory was my anchor. It was what I clung to whenever doubt pressed too close. But on that boat, I could not shake the feeling that authenticity had no place in this family anymore. I sipped my drink, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue, and looked out at the horizon. The waves sparkled in the afternoon sun, promising peace. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe this day was what it appeared to be, a family coming together to honor survival, to honor me. But as Clara's laughter rang too sharply, and as Ethan's eyes weighed me not with affection but calculation, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. Something was off, though I could not yet put it into words. The air was too sweet, the smiles too perfect, the concern too rehearsed. I told myself to ignore it, to enjoy the gift of their attention. Yet a voice inside whispered otherwise. I felt the air shift before it happened. Clara's laughter had just faded, and the ocean stretched around us like a mirror of silver and blue. She rose from her chair, champagne glass in hand, her heels clicking softly against the polished deck. Her movements were unhurried, graceful even, but her eyes locked on mine with a glint I had never seen before. There was no warmth in that gaze, only calculation. She walked toward me with the kind of calm that disguises a storm. My breath caught as the realization crept in, but I was already too late. Clara leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her smile stretched thin, almost mocking. Her lips parted, and with the quiet confidence of someone certain of victory, she whispered, "Enjoy the waves, Grandma." Her words slithered into my ears, laced with contempt. Before I could react, before I could even push my chair back, her hand pressed firmly against my shoulder. It was not a shove of clumsy anger. It was precise, controlled, deliberate. The kind of push that sent me exactly where she wanted me to go. My body lurched forward, my hands shot out for the railing, but the slick metal slipped under my palms. For one suspended moment, the world tilted. I looked to Ethan, my son, my blood, my boy who once clung to my hand when he was small. His face was unreadable, his eyes empty, his body still. He did not move. He did not speak. He only stood there, watching me fall. The next instant, the sea swallowed me. The cold was violent, a knife slicing through my dress, my skin, my bones. It seized my lungs, tore the breath from me, and replaced it with terror. I gasped, but swallowed salt water, the taste burning down my throat. My arms flailed against the weight, my legs kicked weakly, but the surgery had left me slower, less steady. I was not ready for this fight. The ocean roared around me as if laughing at my fragility. Above the surface, I caught one last glimpse of the yacht. Clara's figure leaned against the railing, her glass raised in mock salute. Ethan stood at her side, silent, unmoving, a shadow of the son I once loved. And then the yacht turned, the engine hummed louder, and they drifted away, leaving nothing but white foam in their wake. No hesitation, no remorse, just abandonment. The night closed in fast. The sky, once gold with late afternoon light, darkened into indigo. My heart pounded with the primal terror of knowing I was alone. My hands clawed for something, anything, to keep me afloat. My dress, heavy with seawater, dragged me downward. My knees screamed with pain from the surgery as I kicked against the tide. Every breath was a battle, every second a war between surrender and survival. Inside my mind, voices collided. One whispered to let go, to accept the fate they had chosen for me. Another screamed louder, the voice of the woman who had endured widowhood, illness, and betrayal. That voice spat fire. Not like this, not now, not on their terms. My body trembled with exhaustion, but I forced my head above the water again, coughing, choking, clinging to the surface. I searched the dark horizon, desperate for light, for hope. The coastline was nothing but a smear of shadows miles away. The only sound was the slap of waves against my ears and the echo of Clara's venomous words. The betrayal carved itself deeper into me with every second. My son had stood there, unmoved, while his wife condemned me to die. That image burned behind my eyes even as salt water blurred my vision. The sea tossed me mercilessly. A wave struck hard, pulling me under. I fought upward, my chest exploding with the need for air. My hands broke the surface, grasping wildly until my fingers brushed against something, smooth, hard, floating. A life buoy, loosened from the yacht in their haste. By instinct alone, I clutched it, wrapping my arms around it as though it were the last hand of God. I clung to that buoy with every shred of strength left in me, shivering, coughing, gasping. The cold dug its claws into me, numbing my fingers, stiffening my muscles. My mind spun between terror and clarity. I was alive, for now. But they thought I was gone. They believed the ocean had claimed me, that my fortune had already begun to slip into their greedy hands. The waves rocked me, carrying me farther from shore. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into eternities. My thoughts sharpened into jagged edges. Clara's smirk replayed in my mind. The venom in her whisper seared into my memory. Ethan's silence hurt worse than the cold. Betrayal from a stranger wounds. Betrayal from your own child annihilates. The darkness deepened, and the world grew eerily quiet, save for the lapping of water. Stars began to pierce the sky, indifferent witnesses to my struggle. My body weakened, but my will only hardened. If this was their plan, if this was the way they thought my story would end, then they did not know me at all. Somewhere in the distance, faint and fragile, I thought I heard the hum of a motor. My heart leapt, uncertain if it was salvation or imagination. I raised my arm weakly, the buoy my only anchor. "Help!" I croaked, my voice swallowed by the wind. My vision blurred, but I refused to close my eyes. Not here, not now. I held on, every nerve raw, every thought consumed by one truth. I had been betrayed, discarded, left for dead. But I was still here, alive, breathing. And as the motor grew louder in the distance, a vow crystallized in my heart. If I survived this night, I would not remain silent. I would rise from the ocean they tried to bury me in, and I would make them see that they had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. The lifebuoy was my only salvation. My arms wrapped around it with the desperation of someone refusing to let death claim them. The sea was merciless, tossing me from crest to trough, salt stinging my throat, my body trembling from the cold. Every second felt like a fight against 1,000 invisible hands dragging me downward. My breath came ragged, my teeth chattered violently, yet something inside me refused to release my grip. I clung tighter, whispering to myself, "Not tonight, not like this." Through the blur of salt and darkness, I noticed a faint glow moving across the water. It grew brighter, steady, deliberate. Then came the sound, the low hum of a motor. Hope surged through me, a spark against the icy despair. I raised my arm, weak but determined, and waved frantically. My voice cracked as I shouted, though it barely rose above the roar of waves. "Help! Over here!" My throat burned, but I would not be silent. The light swung toward me. A small fishing boat cut across the water, its outline sharp against the night sky. I saw the silhouette of a man leaning forward, scanning the waves. His voice boomed above the storm, steady and commanding. "Hold on! Don't let go!" His tone carried authority, but also urgency. The boat drew closer, rocking in the swells, and at last a rough, calloused hand reached toward me. "Grab it!" he barked. I lunged, fingers brushing his, then locking tight. With a grunt, he hauled me upward, dragging my soaked body onto the deck. I collapsed against the cold planks, coughing violently as seawater poured from my lungs. The air seared my chest, but it was life, undeniable and raw. The man towered above me, his frame broad, his face weathered from years at sea. His beard was peppered with gray, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Name's Jack Miller," he said simply, throwing a thick oilskin coat over my shivering shoulders. "You're safe now." The coat smelled of salt and diesel, heavy and coarse, but it wrapped around me like armor. I tried to speak, but my voice broke into tremors. Jack crouched down, steadying me with one hand on my shoulder. "Easy," he said. "Don't talk yet. Breathe." His tone left no room for argument. I forced myself to inhale, then exhale slowly. My body shook uncontrollably, but my mind began to sharpen. I looked at him, eyes wide, voice hoarse. They tried to kill me." The words clawed out of me like broken glass. Jack's brow furrowed. He glanced out at the dark horizon, then back at me. "Who?" "My son. His wife. They pushed me overboard. They think I'm gone." The confession tasted bitter, humiliating, but necessary. Jack did not flinch. He studied me for a long moment, as if measuring the truth behind my words. Then, with quiet certainty, he nodded. then you're going to prove them wrong. Those words hit me like a spark to dry tinder. My body was weak, but my spirit flared. I clenched the coat tighter around me, my voice steadier now. If I live through this, I will not let them win. I will not let them walk away with everything my husband and I built. Not after what they did. Jack's lips curved into something between a smirk and a grim smile. Good. Because you're alive, and that means the fight's not over. He turned and barked toward the small cabin. Tyler, bring blankets! A younger man, no older than 17, appeared from inside. His face was boyish but serious, his eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. He carried an armful of rough wool blankets, which Jack wrapped around me one by one. The warmth seeped in slowly, but the chill of betrayal burned hotter than the cold ever could. Tyler asked softly, "What happened to you?" Jack shot him a look, sharp enough to silence. "Not now." Then his eyes softened as he turned back to me. "You'll have time to tell it when you're warm and steady. For now, know this. You're not alone out here. You've got hands willing to pull you out of the water, and you've got a chance to decide what comes next." I nodded slowly, the vow forming fully in my chest. I had been cast aside, discarded, as though my life meant nothing. But the sea had returned me, and Jack had pulled me back from its grasp. That meant something. That meant I was meant to rise again. I stared into the night, my voice dropping to a whisper, but carrying a steel edge. If I survive this night, I'll make them regret underestimating me. I'll make them see who I really am. Jack's hand tightened briefly on my shoulder, grounding me. "That's the spirit," he said. Then he stood, steering the boat toward shore with the certainty of a man who had weathered countless storms. The waves still battered the hull, but inside me, a different tide was turning. The fear that had threatened to drown me was giving way to something else. Resolve. I had seen the truth in my son's eyes, the betrayal in Clara's smile. They believed my story had ended beneath the waves. They were wrong. I pulled the blanket tighter, every muscle still trembling, but my heart beating with new fire. I was not the same woman who had stepped onto that yacht hours ago. That Emily had believed in second chances, in reconciliation, in the fragile hope of family. This Emily had been reborn in salt and darkness, and she would never again bow to the lies of those who plotted against her. The boat surged forward, cutting through the black water. The night sky stretched wide, indifferent to my pain, yet it bore witness to my survival. My lips moved, the vow etched in steel. I will not let them win. Not now. Not ever. The morning after Jack pulled me from the sea, the world declared me gone. The local news flashed my picture across the screen with a headline that twisted my stomach. Emily Carter, lost off the coast of Newport, presumed drowned. My name spoken in the past tense felt like a theft. I was still breathing, but the world was already burying me. Jack had given me shelter in his modest cabin by the docks. He didn't ask for details, only handed me a steaming mug of coffee and said, "Keep your head down for now. Let's see how they play this." His words were steady, but the steel in his tone told me he knew what kind of people I was up against. By mid-afternoon, I saw the performance begin. Clara emerged from the house I once called home, draped in black as if she had dressed from head to toe in grief. She clutched a handkerchief, dabbing dry eyes for the neighbors who gathered with sympathetic expressions. Her voice carried over the fence, trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "It was so sudden," she said, lowering her lashes. "One minute she was enjoying the yacht, the next she was gone. The ocean is cruel." I stood hidden across the street, wrapped in Jack's heavy coat, watching the woman who had tried to kill me turn my death into theater. She cried without tears, but the crowd believed her. People touched her arm, offered condolences, praised her strength. A few even called her remarkable for handling tragedy with such composure. My jaw tightened until it ached. Ethan appeared briefly in the doorway, his tie loosened, his face pale. He didn't speak much. When a neighbor asked, "Ethan, are you holding up all right?" He shook his head and muttered, "I can't talk about it." Then he retreated inside like a coward hiding from his own crime. Clara stepped into the silence with perfect timing, filling the gap with her own tragic performance. It was then I realized the truth. They had not only stolen my life, but were rewriting it. To the world, I was now a fragile woman, undone by the sea, not a mother betrayed by her own blood. They were painting me as weak, confused, careless, while they played the role of grieving heirs. The fury inside me burned hotter than the coffee in my hands. I whispered to myself, "They think I am already dead. They think they have won. But this is only the beginning." I followed from a distance as preparations grew. Within 2 days, there was a memorial service announced at St. Mary's Chapel. Notices went out with carefully chosen words. Emily Carter, beloved mother and neighbor, lost at sea. She will be remembered for her generosity and grace. Every line twisted the knife. I had been generous, yes, I had given Ethan and Clara more than they deserved. But grace? There was nothing graceful about being shoved into the Atlantic like a piece of trash. Jack drove me past the chapel on the morning of the service. We parked down the street, far enough to avoid recognition, close enough for me to see everything. I watched the guests arrive, neighbors in dark coats, old friends from my book club, even people I barely knew but who wanted to pay respects. They carried flowers, offered hugs, whispered prayers. Their grief was real. That cut the deepest. The people who had valued me were being deceived by the very two who had orchestrated my death. Clara arrived last, stepping out of a black car with a composure that made bile rise in my throat. She wore a fitted black dress, pearls at her neck, her hand resting on Ethan's arm as though she were guiding him through his grief. Ethan's eyes stayed downcast, his lips pressed thin as if silence might absolve him. Together, they looked like the perfect tragic couple, united by loss, admired by all. Inside, a portrait of me sat on an easel surrounded by lilies. The irony stung. They had chosen a photo from 2 years ago, taken at Ethan's birthday dinner. I remembered that night well. I had been left out of conversations, seated at the edge of the table, ignored while Clara played hostess. My smile in the picture was faint, uncertain, and now that image was being held up as the version of me they wanted remembered, present, but powerless. I turned away, my chest tight, and whispered to Jack, "They buried me before they even gave me a chance to fight, but I am still here, and I will show them." Jack's voice was steady, his gaze fixed on the church. "Then you need patience. Let them believe their own lie. Let them slip deeper into it. The deeper they sink, the easier it will be to pull them under when the time is right." He was right. Anger alone would not win this war. I needed strategy. I needed proof. And I needed to wait. Watching Clara embrace mourners, hearing Ethan mutter thank you to every sympathy, I understood that this funeral was not just for appearances. It was their shield, their cover to solidify control of everything Thomas and I had built. I clenched my fists inside Jack's coat, forcing my shaking hands to stillness. "They think this is over," I murmured, "but the game hasn't even started." The service ended with hymns and hushed prayers. Clara accepted condolences like a queen graciously receiving subjects. Ethan followed at her side, obedient, complicit. They left with flowers in their arms and sympathy in their pockets. And I, standing hidden in the shadows, felt the last thread of hesitation snap inside me. They had declared me dead. Now I would use that to my advantage. If the world believed Emily Carter was gone, then I had freedom they could not imagine. I could move unseen, gather evidence, strike at the heart of their lies when they least expected. That night, back at Jack's cabin, I stared into the small mirror above the sink. My reflection was pale, lined with exhaustion, but my eyes burned with something new: resolve. I whispered the words that had taken root since the sea spat me back out. I will not forgive, I will not forget, and I will not let them win. They wanted me erased. Instead, I would become the shadow they feared most. The day after the memorial, I made my move. I couldn't afford to linger in shadows forever. If Clara and Ethan thought I was gone, that gave me a narrow window to gather what I needed. My first step was Sophia Reynolds. She was my attorney, the one who had helped me draft my will after Thomas passed. If anyone could shed light on what they were plotting, it was her. I called from a payphone tucked behind a rundown gas station on the outskirts of Newport. My voice was low, steady, but every syllable carried fire. "Sophia, it's Emily Carter." There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Emily? That's impossible. They announced—" "I know what they announced. I'm alive. I need to see you. Now." Within the hour, I was seated in the back office of her modest practice. Sophia's eyes darted between me and the door, as if half expecting Clara to storm in. She pushed a folder across the desk, her hand trembling slightly. "Emily, you need to hear what they've been doing since you disappeared." I braced myself, pulling the folder closer. Inside were copies of legal filings, official letters, even medical evaluations. My pulse quickened as I skimmed the first page. Sophia's voice cut through my concentration, sharp and precise. "Clara filed a petition last month claiming you were showing signs of memory loss and confusion. She called it early cognitive decline. She even submitted notes from a doctor, notes that I can tell you were fabricated." I lifted my head, eyes narrowing. "She's trying to paint me as incompetent." "Exactly. That petition would have allowed Ethan to assume control of your estate, citing power of attorney. But they didn't stop there." Sophia flipped to another set of documents. "Clara also applied for a life insurance policy in your name, $2 million. Ethan signed as your supposed guardian, claiming it was for your protection." The words cut deeper than the ocean ever could. Insurance, guardianship, lies stacked so neatly they almost looked legitimate. My jaw clenched as I pushed the papers back toward her. So, they needed me dead for more than one reason. The inheritance wasn't enough. They wanted the insurance payout too. Sophia nodded grimly. "With both, they'd have everything. Your home, your savings, and a lump sum payout large enough to erase every trace of debt." I checked the underwriting documents. They pushed it through fast, too fast. That means they had help inside the system. I felt my stomach churn. Their greed was so much bigger, so much colder than I had imagined. It wasn't just betrayal. It was business. Clara and Ethan had turned me into an equation, a ledger entry, a means to their perfect life. My voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the weight of steel. They staged a performance at my funeral. They convinced the world I was gone. But what they don't know is that I will expose every piece of this scheme. I will rip the mask off their faces. Sophia leaned in, her tone urgent. "Emily, you have to be careful. They already crossed one line when they pushed you overboard. If they find out you're alive, they won't hesitate to try again." I met her gaze without blinking. "Let them try. I'm not hiding anymore. I will outthink them, outlast them, and when the time comes, I will stand in front of them with proof they cannot erase." For the first time since I entered her office, Sophia allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Then you'll need allies. I'll keep digging into these filings. And Emily, whatever happens, keep records. Every conversation, every document, every face that might testify. We'll need it all." I slid the folder back into my bag, the papers rustling like weapons waiting to be drawn. As I rose to leave, my reflection in her office window caught my eye. I no longer saw the grieving widow or the recovering patient. I saw a woman stripped of illusions, armed with resolve sharper than any blade. The drive back to Jack's cabin was silent. I stared out at the passing lights, each one a reminder of how easily I could have been erased. Clara's false tears, Ethan's empty silence, the neighbor's sympathy. It was all built on the lie of my absence. But lies rot from within, and I intended to be the rot they never anticipated. That night, sitting at Jack's kitchen table with the folder spread before me, I let the fury settle into focus. Clara thought she had orchestrated the perfect scheme: declare me incompetent, cash in the insurance, and inherit everything. But she had overlooked one detail: her victim lived. I whispered into the stillness, every word deliberate. They will regret underestimating me. They will see me rise from the grave they dug. And when I'm done, the world will know who they truly are. Jack looked at me from across the table, his weathered hands folded, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he nodded once. Then let's make sure you have everything you need to bury them instead. Jack and I sat at his kitchen table late that evening, the folder of documents spread between us like pieces of a crime scene. I was still reeling from Sophia's revelation about the insurance and the false incompetence petition, but Jack's next words cut even deeper. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression heavy. "Emily, there's something I haven't told you. A few weeks before all this, I saw Clara, not with Ethan, not at the house. She was in Providence at a cafe I go to after selling fish at the market, and she wasn't alone." I lifted my eyes, my chest tightening. Who was she with? A man in a white coat. Doctor, no doubt about it. Mid-40s, expensive watch, carried himself like he thought he owned the world. They sat in the corner, whispering like conspirators. I only noticed because Clara doesn't exactly fit into a place like that. She looked nervous, kept glancing at the door. His words struck me like lightning. I whispered, "A doctor." That's how they did it. That's how they got the report Sophia showed me. Jack frowned. "What reports?" I slid one of the papers across to him. The heading read, "Preliminary Cognitive Assessment, Emily Carter." The words beneath were venom. Phrases like memory lapses, confusion in daily tasks, possible early Alzheimer's. None of it was true. Every line a calculated lie. Jack skimmed the page, his jaw tightening. "So they bought themselves a diagnosis." "Yes," I said bitterly. "They staged my decline. Clara met that doctor in Providence to pay for the story that I was losing my mind. That's how they planned to strip me of my estate. That's how they justified taking control of my life before they ever pushed me off that yacht." The realization made my stomach twist. This was no reckless act of greed, no spur-of-the-moment decision. It was organized, methodical. They had mapped every detail, forged every path, and paid off whoever they needed to clear the way. Jack slammed a fist lightly on the table. "That's not a family squabble anymore, that's a conspiracy, and it means they're not working alone." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I thought of Clara's polished smile at the memorial, of Ethan's cowardly silence. They weren't just opportunists. They were actors in a performance rehearsed long before I set foot on that yacht. I pressed a trembling hand to the folder, forcing my voice steady. They weren't satisfied with inheritance. They wanted more. They wanted the insurance money, the house, the bank accounts. And they knew they couldn't get it all unless I was both incompetent and dead. So they built their case. A doctor's word, a false report, a staged accident. Jack leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "So what are you going to do?" The question burned. For the first time since crawling back from the sea, I felt clarity cut through the fog. "I'm going to expose them. Every lie, every signature, every meeting. Clara thinks she has outsmarted me, but she doesn't realize she left fingerprints on everything. That doctor, whoever he is, took her money, and men like that never risk everything for free. He'll have a trail, and I'll find it." Jack gave a slow nod, approval flickering in his weathered eyes. "Then let's start by finding out who he is. You get me the name, and I'll get you the truth." The conversation left me restless. That night, lying awake in the small spare room Jack had given me, I replayed every moment with Ethan and Clara. The way Clara had urged me to let her handle the hospital paperwork after my knee surgery. The way Ethan had insisted I sign temporary forms so they could help with bills. Every kindness had been a calculation, every gesture a step toward my erasure. My chest ached, but not from grief. It was rage, sharpened by betrayal. I whispered into the dark, my voice steady even as tears stung my eyes. "They think I am gone. They think I am powerless. But they have no idea how wrong they are." The next morning, I returned to Sophia's office. She greeted me with cautious relief. I didn't waste time. Sophia, I need the name of the doctor Clara used for those reports. Sophia pulled out her files, her brow furrowed. There were 2 signatures, but one kept repeating. Dr. William Hayes, neurologist, runs a private practice out of Providence. The name felt like a weapon in my hand. William Hayes, the man Clara had met in secret, the man who had taken money to declare me unfit, to brand me with an illness I did not have. Sophia's voice was tight. Emily, if Hayes is dirty, he won't go down easily. Men like him keep records locked away. He'll have protection. And if Clara and Ethan are paying him, they'll protect him too. I met her gaze, unflinching. Then we take the fight to him, quietly, carefully. But we find what he sold them. I want every document, every transfer, every lie he wrote in my name. I won't rest until I can put it in front of a judge and tear down their entire scheme. For a moment, silence hung between us. Then Sophia reached across the desk and placed her hand on mine. You survived the ocean, Emily. Now survive this, but don't do it alone. As I left her office, the city hummed with life, oblivious to the war quietly building beneath its surface. Clara and Ethan thought they had buried me under lies, but the tide was turning. They weren't just greedy children anymore. They were part of a machine that forged reports, bought insurance, and orchestrated deaths. And I was the crack in that machine. I looked up at the Providence skyline, my voice steady with resolve. You built an empire on lies, Clara. Now I will tear it down piece by piece. The night was heavy with rain when Ethan and Clara pulled their car into the driveway of the Carter estate. The house loomed dark against the storm, but its windows glowed faintly with the warmth of staged perfection. They had just returned from another dinner with friends, an evening filled with whispered condolences and exaggerated grief. Clara pulled off her gloves, tossing them carelessly onto the dashboard. Her lips curled into a smirk. They believe every word, not a single doubt in the room. Emily Carter, tragic, confused, lost to the sea, exactly as we planned. Ethan loosened his tie, exhaustion lining his face. You don't think anyone's asking too many questions. Sophia Reynolds wasn't at the memorial. That bothers me. Clara's voice sharpened like glass. Sophia knows her place. She has her career to think about. She wouldn't risk it. Besides, once the insurance clears, no one will care. You'll be the grieving son, I'll be the dutiful wife, and we'll finally have what we deserve. Ethan hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the rain streaking down the windshield. She was my mother, Clara snapped, her tone cold as steel. She was an obstacle. Don't dress it up as anything else. He exhaled, long and heavy. Sometimes I wonder if we went too far. Clara leaned closer, her nails digging lightly into his arm. Too far? Ethan, look around. We were drowning in debt. Your mother never trusted you with real control. She would have kept the empire until her dying breath and left us scraps. We took what we were owed, and no one can undo it now. The conversation ended in silence, broken only by the hum of the engine. They stepped out into the rain, Clara adjusting her coat with the composure of a woman certain of her victory. Ethan trailed behind, his shoulders sagging with an unease he couldn't shake. The front door creaked as Clara unlocked it, her heels clicking against the marble foyer. She flipped on the lights, shaking droplets from her umbrella. Ethan shut the door behind them, his movements slow, distracted. Then, they both froze. The dining room lights were already on. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier, and there, at the head of the table where Thomas once sat, was me, Emily Carter, alive, dry, composed, waiting. In front of me lay the folder Sophia had entrusted to me, insurance papers, fraudulent petitions, false medical reports. They were neatly arranged, like courses in a dinner prepared for judgment. I let the silence stretch, the clock ticking loud in the stillness. Then I spoke, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. Surprised to see me at my own table? Clara's purse slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor. Lipstick, receipts, and a gleaming silver pen scattered across the marble. She staggered back, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. Ethan's face drained of color. He stood frozen, keys still clutched in his hand, his mouth opening but no sound emerging. His eyes locked on mine, as though I were a ghost risen from the grave. I remained seated, unhurried, my hands folded loosely on the table. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside the house the real storm had already begun. The silence shattered the moment Clara's scream ripped through the dining room. Her voice was shrill, jagged, dripping with panic. "She should have been gone! You were supposed to be gone!" Her hands clawed at her hair, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. "This isn't possible! It's not possible!" I didn't flinch. My fingers slid across the polished oak until they found the small recorder I had placed beside the folder. I clicked it on, the red light blinking alive. My voice was calm, deliberate. "Say that again, Clara. Say it loud, so the world can hear." Her face twisted, eyes wide with rage and fear. "You don't understand. We had no choice. You were supposed to drown and disappear. You were in the way, always in the way." Ethan staggered back a step, his face ashen. His voice trembled as he tried to reclaim control. "Mom, you're confused. You're not well. You shouldn't be here." His eyes darted to the papers spread across the table, then back to me. His lips quivered as he forced the words out. This isn't what it looks like." I leaned forward, my gaze unshakable. "It looks exactly like what it is. Insurance policies in my name. False medical reports signed by a crooked doctor. A petition to declare me incompetent. Do you want to tell me how those ended up in your hands?" Clara slammed her palms on the table, sending a wine glass crashing to the floor. Her breath came in shallow bursts. "Because you never trusted us. Because you never let Ethan live his own life. You held everything over us, the house, the company, the money. We deserved better." I tilted my head, my voice sharpening. "Better than what, Clara? Better than honesty? Better than earning your place through integrity?" I tapped the folder with one finger. "Or did you decide it was easier to bury me and steal everything I built?" Her composure cracked, tears streaking through the foundation she had painted on her face. "We were drowning in debt, Emily. Ethan's business was failing. We had nothing left. Do you know what it's like to look at your future and see nothing but ruin?" Ethan's voice broke, quieter but trembling with guilt. "Clara, stop." She whipped around to him, her voice lashing like a whip. "No! She needs to hear it. We did what we had to do. You think your precious mother would have handed over control? She would have let us starve before giving us $1. I pressed the recorder closer, my tone like ice. "So you tried to erase me. You tried to brand me as senile. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to drown me." Ethan's knees buckled slightly, his hands gripping the back of a chair as if to keep himself upright. His lips parted, his words a desperate whisper. "Mom, please. We didn't mean—" "Didn't mean?" My voice cut him off like a blade. "I heard your silence on that deck. I felt your eyes on me when Clara whispered, 'Enjoy the waves, Grandma,' before pushing me into the sea." "You meant every second of it, Ethan. Your silence spoke louder than her shove." Clara's voice rose again, hysteria breaking through her words. "You should have died. No one survives that fall, not in those waters. You were supposed to disappear, and we were supposed to finally be free." I leaned back in the chair, the storm outside echoing her shrieks. My calmness was the sharpest weapon in the room. But I didn't. I survived. And now the truth sits on this table in black and white, signed by your own hands. Insurance fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. Ethan finally broke, his voice shattering into pieces. "Clara, stop talking. Please, for God's sake, stop talking." But she couldn't. Her mask had split wide open. She pounded her fists on the table, sobbing and screaming. "We deserved it. We deserved everything. That money should have been ours. You were old, useless, clinging to a fortune you didn't even know how to spend. Why shouldn't we take it?" I clicked the recorder off, tucking it neatly into my bag. My voice was low, almost a whisper, but every syllable struck with precision. "Thank you, Clara. That's exactly what I needed." their faces drained of color, the weight of their own words filling the room like smoke. For the first time, Clara realized she had handed me the rope to hang her with. Ethan's eyes welled with tears, but no apology could wash away the betrayal that had already been spoken aloud. And I sat there, unshaken, watching them unravel at my table, the very table where they had once dined on my generosity, never dreaming it would become their courtroom. The storm outside roared like a living thing, thunder rolling over the Carter estate, but the louder sound was Clara's ragged breathing. Her outburst still echoed through the dining room, her body trembling as if her words had burned her from the inside out. Ethan sat slumped in the chair, his face pale, his eyes darting between me and the damning evidence spread across the table. I rose slowly, smoothing the front of my coat. My voice was steady, low, but carried the weight of judgment. You believed you had destroyed me. You thought the sea swallowed me, that my story ended with your lies. But here I stand, and I didn't come here tonight to beg or to reason. I came here to reveal. Clara's lips parted, her eyes narrowing. Reveal what? That you're some ghost? That we should be afraid? She laughed, but the sound was brittle, breaking halfway into a sob. You can't prove anything. No one will believe you. I stepped closer, my gaze locked on hers. That's where you're wrong, because I'm not alone. I crossed the room, each step deliberate, and placed my hand on the door. I could feel Clara's panic rising, her voice sharp and desperate. Don't you dare bring anyone else into this. I pulled the door open, and there, framed in the doorway, stood Sophia Reynolds, dressed in dark gray, her expression calm and unyielding. Beside her, 2 uniformed Newport police officers, their presence heavy as judgment itself. The moment froze. Clara's jaw slackened, Ethan's breath caught in his chest, the storm howling behind them like a drumbeat of fate. Sophia was the first to speak, her voice even, every word honed like steel. Mrs. Carter is not alone tonight. She asked me to prepare everything, every forged petition, every fraudulent insurance claim, every doctor's falsified report. It's all here. She lifted her leather briefcase, setting it with precision on the table where moments earlier Clara had screamed her confessions. Clara staggered back, her heels clattering against the marble floor. No, this isn't possible. You can't do this. One of the officers, a tall man with weathered features, stepped forward. His voice was deep, official, and final. We've been monitoring communications since Mrs. Carter resurfaced. Phone records, financial transfers, meetings with Dr. William Hayes. There's enough evidence here to charge you both. His eyes fixed on Clara. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The words fell heavy in the room. Ethan's lips moved soundlessly, like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the courage. Clara let out a strangled cry. No, you don't understand. We were desperate. You don't know what it's like, drowning in debt, living under her shadow. She jabbed a trembling finger at me. She never would have given us anything. She wanted us to beg forever, to stay small while she controlled every dollar. I raised my hand, silencing her. My voice was calm but edged with finality. You mistake discipline for cruelty, Clara. I gave you opportunities, more than you earned, more than you deserved. What you lacked wasn't money. It was integrity. Ethan finally found his voice, though it quivered. Mom, I didn't want this to go this far. I turned my gaze to him, steady and piercing. You stood on that deck, Ethan. You watched Clara shove me into the sea. You heard her whisper, "Enjoy the waves, Grandma." You didn't move. You didn't speak. You let it happen. His shoulders collapsed, tears streaking down his cheeks. I was weak. I thought maybe it was the only way out. Clara spun toward him, her voice shrill. Don't you dare blame me alone. You wanted it too. You signed the papers. You begged me to fix your mess. Sophia stepped closer, her tone sharp. Enough. Every word you speak now only buries you deeper. These documents already speak louder than either of you. She spread papers across the table: contracts, signatures, transfer slips, policies. "Clara, your trail is meticulous, but money always leaves its shadow. And you left one straight to us." Clara shook her head, her manicured nails digging into her palms. No, I won't let this happen. She's supposed to be dead. She was supposed to vanish, and we were supposed to be free." I looked at her, unflinching. But I didn't vanish. I survived, and I made sure the law stood with me before I ever walked back into this house. The second officer stepped forward, handcuffs in his grasp. His voice was calm, practiced. "Mrs. Clara Carter, Mr. Ethan Carter, you're both under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Clara's scream ripped through the room, raw and animal. "You can't do this! You can't take everything from me!" She lunged toward the table, trying to scatter the papers, but the officer seized her arm, pinning her in place. Ethan sat frozen, hands limp at his sides, silent tears tracing his cheeks as if the fight had already left him. I stood still, my heart steady, my voice carrying the final blow. "You thought this was a family dispute, a story you could control with lies and staged grief. But you miscalculated. This was never just about inheritance. It was about justice. And justice has a way of finding its way home." Clara's eyes locked on mine as the cuffs closed around her wrists. Rage burned there, but beneath it, I saw the flicker of something else. Fear. Ethan lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. Sophia closed the briefcase with a snap, her eyes softening for the first time that evening as she turned to me. "It's over, Emily. Tonight, the truth has spoken." I drew in a long breath, the weight of months of betrayal lifting slightly from my chest. The storm outside began to break, the thunder fading into the distance. Inside the Carter estate, another storm had ended, the storm of deceit, greed, and betrayal. But this end was not mine, it was theirs. Clara's wrists were bound in steel, her chest rising and falling in furious bursts, her mascara smeared into streaks of defiance. Ethan sat collapsed in the chair beside her, his hands limp on his knees, his head bowed as though the weight of truth had already crushed him. I stood at the end of the table, calm but sharp, my hands resting on the folders Sophia had helped me prepare. The officers lingered at the door, their eyes watchful, waiting for my signal. Sophia sat quietly, her pen poised over her notepad, capturing every detail with surgical precision. I clicked open the folder and laid the first sheet flat on the oak table. The pages gleamed under the chandelier's light, the words heavy with deception. "This," I said, my voice steady but cutting, "is the report Dr. Hayes filed 6 weeks ago. According to this document, I suffer from early-stage Alzheimer's disease. It claims I was disoriented, unable to manage my affairs, incapable of handling financial matters." I pushed the paper toward Clara. "The problem is, Clara, I never saw Dr. Hayes on that date. I was at Rhode Island Hospital recovering from surgery. My attending physician, Dr. Patel, has signed a sworn affidavit stating my memory and cognition were intact, which means this document isn't a diagnosis. It's a forgery." Clara's eyes blazed, her teeth clenched. "This is all lies!" she shrieked, her voice so sharp it echoed against the high ceilings. She twisted in her chair, her cuffed hands rattling. "You planted this. You made this up to frame us." I didn't blink. "Frame you? Or expose you?" I slid another paper forward, this one stamped with the seal of Harbor Bank. "These are the bank statements, transfers attempted from my personal accounts into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Dates, amounts, even the wire instructions, all traced back to the IP address of this house." Clara froze, her chest heaving, her lips quivering before words returned. No, you can't tie that to me. Ethan, tell them it wasn't me." But Ethan didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his shoulders caved in, his silence louder than any denial. His body sagged with defeat, the shame of recognition carved into every line of his face. Sophia leaned forward, her tone crisp, deliberate. The bank flagged those transfers and contacted my office directly, Mrs. Carter. I advised them to freeze the accounts until the rightful owner, your mother-in-law, could confirm. So yes, Clara, there is a direct trail, and you left it yourself." Clara's scream fractured into sobs, her fury colliding with fear. "It's not true! It's not true!" she wailed, her voice cracking like thin glass. Her eyes darted toward Ethan, desperate, pleading. "Say something! For God's sake, defend me!" But Ethan only pressed his palms to his face, muffling a broken whisper. "It's over, Clara. Stop fighting. We can't undo this." Her face twisted in disbelief, betrayal hitting her like a blow. "You coward!" she spat, venom dripping from the word. "You wanted this as much as I did. Don't you dare leave me to burn alone." I leaned forward, my voice calm, decisive. "He doesn't have to say a word. His silence says everything, and your own mouth sealed the rest." I gestured toward the recorder, still blinking red on the table. "Every word you screamed tonight is preserved. Every admission, every justification, every drop of venom you spat. It's all here. No jury will doubt what they hear." Clara's shoulders shook violently, tears streaming unchecked down her cheeks. You planned this, from the beginning." I nodded once, steady. "No, Clara, you planned it. I just survived it, and survival gave me the chance to finish what you started." The officers stepped closer, the metallic jangle of the cuffs punctuating the air. Clara thrashed, her voice breaking into a desperate howl. "This isn't justice! This is betrayal! She should have been dead!" Her words fell into silence, heavy, final. Ethan let out a long, shuddering breath, his head lowering until his chin touched his chest. In that stillness, the audience of this twisted drama, neighbors, police, Sophia and I, understood. Clara's rage had collapsed into ruin. Ethan's silence was his surrender. And I, Emily Carter, stood not as their victim, but as their reckoning. I closed the folder with a firm snap, my voice carrying the last strike. The evidence is no longer mine. It belongs to the law, and the law doesn't drown. The storm outside eased into a quiet drizzle, as if the world itself had heard the verdict. The rain outside hammered harder against the windows, as though it wanted to wash away the stench of what was unfolding inside. Clara was trembling, her wrists bound, her hair sticking to her face in streaks of sweat and tears. Ethan sat like a hollow man, his silence the loudest confession of all. But Clara still had venom left, and that venom would destroy her. I leaned forward, the recorder blinking red at my side. My voice was low but cutting. "You forged medical reports, Clara. You tried to strip me of my life, my dignity, my money, and yet you still scream lies. Do you have anything left to say that is true?" Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "True? You want the truth? Fine." She spat the words, her voice rising like a whip. "We just needed her gone. Then everything would look perfect. Don't you see? With her out of the way, no one would question the papers, the transfers, the deals. It was supposed to be seamless." Sophia, standing by the door, lifted her chin, signaling the officers to hold steady. Her eyes flicked toward me. Keep her talking. I kept my voice calm, though my heart hammered. "Seamless for whom, Clara? Just you and Ethan? Or someone else?" Clara's laugh was wild, broken. "You think this was just us? We're not smart enough to plan all this. We were guided, protected, promised a place at the table. Miranda Torres, MT. You think she just does estate planning? No, she runs everything. She said if we cooperated, if we gave her what she wanted, the rest would fall into place." I let the silence stretch, letting her fill it with her own desperation. "And what exactly did she want?" Clara's chest heaved, her voice cracking between rage and hysteria. "Control. Access. The money was just the beginning. There are whole files in her office, names, accounts, records of transactions. Children, Emily. Children handed off like property. Do you hear me? It's not just old women being pushed aside. It's babies, teenagers, anyone they can profit from." The room went still. Even Ethan lifted his head, his eyes wide with horror. He whispered, almost to himself, "Clara, stop. Stop talking." But she couldn't. The dam had burst, and her fury dragged every secret into the open. She said our baby would fit perfectly into the story, that no one would question us if they believed he was ours. Do you know how easy it is to fake a birth certificate when MT is involved? She has doctors, judges, even adoption officers in her pocket. We just had to clear the last obstacle. You! She pointed a shaking finger at me, her voice nearly a scream. You were supposed to die so the puzzle would be complete. Sophia's hand tightened on the doorknob, her eyes flicking toward the officers again. The taller one whispered into his radio, his tone clipped, urgent. I forced my voice to stay even. So you admit it. You admit everything. You and Ethan weren't just greedy children. You were part of something far darker. Clara thrashed in her chair, her voice hoarse. Don't twist my words. We didn't start this. We were desperate. She offered us everything, money, power, a child to parade like a trophy. We just followed orders. Sophia stepped forward then, her face unreadable. And now you've confessed to conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and aiding human trafficking. Do you realize what you've just done? Clara's face froze as if the air had been sucked out of her lungs. The reality of her own words struck her. Too late. Her voice dropped to a whisper. No, I didn't mean... I pressed the recorder button firmly, the small click echoing like a gavel. You meant every word, Clara, and now the law will hold you to them. Ethan shook his head, his voice hollow. It's over. You've destroyed us. And his eyes flicked to me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the boy he once was, the son who used to hold my hand at the park. But it was gone in an instant, buried under years of choices that had brought him here. The officers moved in. One placed a steadying hand on Clara's shoulder, the other pulled her upright. She fought, screaming, her voice breaking. She was supposed to be gone. MT promised us everything. You don't understand. But her words no longer mattered. Every sound, every syllable was already captured on tape. Her hysteria had turned her into her own executioner. Sophia closed the briefcase, her voice calm but edged with steel. Emily, you did it. She exposed the entire operation herself. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is a federal case. I stood straighter, the weight of betrayal still heavy, but the taste of justice finally on my tongue. Clara's fury had devoured her, and Ethan's silence had condemned him. For the first time since the yacht, I felt the tide turning, because the storm had not drowned me. It had drowned them. The room exploded into chaos when the front door burst open. The sound of boots striking hardwood echoed like thunder. Uniformed officers poured inside, their voices sharp, commanding, cutting through the storm of Clara's shrieks. "Police! Stay seated! Do not resist!" Clara's face twisted into something feral. She jerked against her restraints, her voice a piercing scream. "She's old! She's lying! You can't believe her!" She thrashed so hard the chair legs scraped and groaned against the floor. Ethan flinched as two officers approached him. His hands trembled violently as he raised them, palms open, as if surrender could wash away everything. His voice cracked into the air, brittle and broken. "I didn't want this. I swear I didn't want any of this. But I was drowning in debt." His words collapsed into a hoarse whisper. "I didn't see another way." I stood still, my breath steady, my hands folded calmly in front of me. "You always had another way, Ethan. You just didn't choose it." An officer clicked the cuffs around Clara's wrists with a decisive snap. She spat toward me, her face flushed with rage. "You're nothing but a bitter old woman. We were going to make everything perfect, and you ruined it." Her voice cracked again, veering between fury and desperation. The lead detective, a tall man with sharp gray eyes, stepped forward. His badge glinted under the chandelier. He didn't flinch at Clara's hysteria. Instead, he placed the small, digital recorder I had been using into an evidence bag and handed it off to another officer. "We have more than enough," he said firmly. "The audio captures every admission, every forged document, every attempt at fraud." He turned toward me, his voice softening. "Mrs. Carter, you've given us a gift tonight, a clean thread that unravels an entire web." I nodded once, my voice low but clear. "You think you're just looking at one greedy couple? You're wrong. There's something larger behind this. Clara couldn't have forged medical files and insurance policies without help." The detective's jaw tightened. "You're right, and we've suspected it for months. This MT you mentioned, we've heard whispers about her. She operates in the shadows, connecting families who want to erase their elderly relatives with professionals who make it look legitimate. Doctors, lawyers, even accountants." Clara jerked against the officers, her voice shrill, panicked. "Don't you dare drag her into this! You don't know who you're dealing with!" Her outburst was met with silence from Ethan, whose head hung lower, shame painting every line of his face. The detective leaned down toward Clara, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You just did the work for us. By trying to shield her, you confirmed she exists. And trust me, Mrs. Carter, we'll find her." Clara's scream fractured into sobs, her body sagging against the cuffs. The officers led her toward the door, her cries echoing down the hall. "Go." Ethan followed behind, silent, almost hollow. His shoulders collapsed as if the weight of every lie was pressing him into the ground. When the door shut behind them, silence filled the room again. The detective sat across from me, his hands folded. "What you uncovered tonight doesn't stop here. The forged Alzheimer's report. It wasn't just sloppy paperwork. We already have evidence of other cases where Dr. Hayes signed similar reports for different families. All suspicious, all conveniently leading to sudden deaths and quick transfers of assets." I felt a coldness grip my chest, not from fear, but from the enormity of it. "So it wasn't just me." He shook his head slowly. "No. Clara and Ethan are just one piece of a larger pattern. We believe this network has touched at least a dozen estates in the last 5 years. Every time the story looks the same: a diagnosis of mental decline, a sudden accident, and relatives who inherit without question. But now, thanks to your evidence, we have names, dates, paper trails, a way to connect it all." Sophia spoke then, her voice precise. "And Clara's outburst tonight. She mentioned someone pulling the strings. That was no slip of the tongue. That was fear. Whoever MT is, Clara believes she's powerful enough to protect her, which means MT is more than a shadow. She's operating openly, hiding in plain sight." The detective nodded. "We'll subpoena financial records, hospital logs, and legal filings. If Clara's desperate enough, she may even cooperate for a lighter sentence, and that could give us everything we need." I stared at the folder of documents still spread across the table. The papers that represented my survival, my refusal to be erased. My voice was steady, but I could feel the fire beneath it. "You'll find MT, and when you do, you'll see she's left a trail of lives shattered, elderly parents robbed of their dignity, families destroyed, people like me pushed off yachts and left to drown." The detective's gaze hardened, his voice resolute. "And people like you are the reason she'll fall. Because you lived, you saw, and you refused to stay silent." I exhaled, slow and heavy, the weight of weeks pressing out of me. I didn't survive the ocean to hide. I survived so this would end. The detective stood, extending his hand. "And it will. Tonight was the first crack in a wall that's been standing for years. But walls always fall, Mrs. Carter. Always." I shook his hand firmly, feeling the steel of his resolve match my own. As the last officers carried the evidence out into the storm, I looked at the empty chairs where Ethan and Clara had sat. For a moment, grief washed over me, for the son I once loved, for the life I once believed in. But beneath it was something stronger, a truth that burned brighter than betrayal. They had tried to drown me, but instead they had pulled themselves into the deep. And I, standing steady, had become the tide that carried their lies away. The rain outside began to ease, leaving only the soft drip of water sliding down the glass. Inside, the silence no longer felt heavy. The courthouse in Providence was packed that morning. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing, microphones stretched forward like spears. I kept my head high as I entered, not because I wanted the attention, but because I knew the truth had to be seen. Newport had whispered long enough. Today, the whispers would be spoken aloud in the halls of justice. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Clara sat at the defense table, her once carefully maintained elegance replaced by a haggard, venomous glare. She wore a dark suit, her wrists chained, her eyes darting around the courtroom like a cornered animal. Ethan sat beside her, his shoulders slumped, his expression hollow. He didn't look at me. He hadn't since that night. The judge, stern and steady, called the court to order. The charges were read, each word sharp as a blade. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Clara's lips curled into a sneer, but her hands trembled on the table. The prosecution wasted no time. They presented the forged Alzheimer's report, the insurance policy Clara had taken out in my name, the bank statements showing her attempts to siphon my accounts. Then they played the recording, her own voice screaming, confessing, spitting venom without realizing the trap she had set for herself. On the speakers, her words cut through the courtroom like ice. We just needed her gone, then everything would look perfect. The gallery gasped. Some people covered their mouths, others shook their heads in disbelief. The perfect family of Newport was being stripped bare, their poison laid open for everyone to see. Clara slammed her fists against the table, her voice breaking through the silence. She set me up. That old woman is a liar. She's twisting everything. The judge's gavel struck once. Silence, Mrs. Carter. One more outburst and you will be removed. Ethan shifted in his seat, his face pale. When the prosecutor turned to him, he didn't resist. He spoke quietly, but every word carried the weight of a drowning man clawing for air. I was in debt. Crippling debt. I made mistakes, gambling, risky investments. Clara convinced me this was the only way. I went along with it. But I never wanted her dead. I swear I didn't. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Some pitied him, others shook their heads. But everyone knew. Silence can be as damning as action. The defense tried to paint me as a bitter widow, clinging to money, inventing conspiracies. But each time they struck, the evidence hit harder. Sophia, calm and meticulous, countered every argument with documents, signatures, and timelines. She stood as my shield, and in her voice I heard the certainty that justice was closing in. When I took the stand, the room held its breath. I told them what had happened, not with theatrics, but with clarity. I described Clara's smirk, Ethan's empty eyes, the cold shove into the ocean. I told them about the fishing boat, about clawing my way back from death, about the folder of evidence spread across their dining table. And then I looked at Clara, my voice steady. You wanted me erased, but here I am, alive, strong, and unwilling to let you do this to anyone else. For the first time, Clara didn't scream back. She simply looked away, her eyes glassy, as if the weight of exposure was finally crushing her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was swift and decisive, guilty on all counts. Clara Carter, once the polished daughter-in-law admired at cocktail parties, was sentenced to 25 years in prison with no chance of parole. Ethan's fate was different. Because of his cooperation, his admission of debt, and his testimony that helped dismantle the wider network, his sentence was lighter, but still heavy, 15 years in federal prison. He wept when the sentence was read, silent tears that fell onto the defense table. He looked older than his years, a man broken by his own choices. Outside the courthouse, Newport's whispers became a roar. Neighbors who once envied Ethan and Clara's lifestyle shook their heads in disgust. The perfect family, they muttered, was nothing but a play. Mothers clutched their children tighter, reminding them that greed could rot even the closest bonds. Community shame settled like a storm cloud. The Carter name, once tied to respect, was now a warning. People pointed to the grand house on Bellevue Avenue and said, "That's where the lie lived." As I left the courthouse, the cameras flashed again, reporters shouting questions I didn't bother to answer. What mattered wasn't the headlines. What mattered was that justice had spoken, not just for me, but for every elderly person who had been silenced, manipulated, or erased by families who valued money more than love. Sophia walked beside me, her briefcase in hand, her expression fierce but softened with relief. "You did it," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No, we did it. And now others will finally see the truth for what it is." For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The ocean had tried to claim me. Clara had tried to erase me. But instead, their lies had been dragged into the light, and the light had burned them to ash. As the courthouse doors closed behind me, I knew this wasn't just my victory. It was a warning that justice, though slow, is relentless, and that no matter how carefully someone builds their empire of lies, the truth will always come crashing in, like the tide against the shore. The ocean stretched wide before me, its waves steady, endless, and alive. From my balcony, I could hear the tide crashing against the rocks below, the same sound that once swallowed me whole. Yet now, it no longer felt threatening. It was steady, eternal, almost like a heartbeat. My home, the old coastal villa in Newport, stood firm against the salt wind, restored and quiet. I lived there alone, but not lonely. Each morning I brewed a pot of tea, opened the French windows, and let the air carry away the memories of deceit and betrayal. The silence was no longer heavy. It was earned. Jack Miller visited often. He would show up without warning, his pickup truck crunching along the gravel drive. Sometimes he brought a bucket of striped bass or flounder, fresh from his morning catch. Other times, it was just him, his weathered hands holding nothing more than a newspaper and a smile. We would sit on the porch, him telling stories of storms at sea, ships nearly lost, and men who found redemption on the water. One evening, as the sky burned pink with sunset, Jack leaned back in his chair and said, "Funny thing, Emily. That night I pulled you from the water. I figured you were just another soul swallowed by the Atlantic, but you came out stronger than the tide itself." I looked at him, quiet for a moment. Then I answered, "The ocean tested me, but I refused to sink. And maybe that's what survival really is. Not about strength, but about refusing to let go when the water wants to claim you." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got more fight in you than half the men I know." Sophia Reynolds also became a constant presence. No longer just my attorney, she had become a confidant, almost like the daughter I never had. We spent long afternoons in my study, the heavy oak desk between us piled with papers and folders. But these were no longer weapons of defense. They were blueprints for the future. "Emily," she said one day, tapping a pen against a draft, "this is your chance to rewrite everything, to take what they tried to steal from you and put it towards something lasting." She was right. My wealth had been the target of greed, but it didn't have to end there. Together, we established a foundation, part of my estate set aside to support local community programs, scholarships for underprivileged youth, housing support for widows, and aid for elderly victims of fraud. "Are you sure you want to leave this much to strangers?" Sophia asked gently. I smiled. "They won't be strangers. They'll be people who need it. That's more family than Ethan or Clara ever proved to be." Her eyes softened. "You're turning a wound into something powerful." I signed the papers with steady hands, the ink flowing cleanly, no hesitation. For once, the act of signing didn't feel like surrender. It felt like claiming my place in the world again. The villa became a sanctuary not just for me, but for others too. Neighbors who once looked at me with pity now stopped by with warmth. Eleanor from down the lane brought pies. Mrs. Harris from the book club came by with novels she thought I'd enjoy. Even the children playing on the beach waved when they saw me, calling, "Hi, Miss Emily!" There was a time I feared whispers, back when Clara wore her black dress and played the grieving widow for the neighborhood. Now the whispers had turned into respect. People knew the truth. They saw me not as a victim, but as someone who faced the storm and came back standing. Still, the nights weren't always easy. There were moments when I woke to the sound of the ocean and felt again the cold shock of being pushed into its depths. Moments when I could hear Clara's sneer echoing in my ears. "Enjoy the waves, Grandma." But then I would rise, walk to the balcony, and stare at the moonlit water until the fear dissolved into something else. Determination. I wasn't broken. I was alive. Jack noticed the shadows sometimes. "It doesn't go away, does it?" he asked one night, watching me trace the rim of my teacup with my finger. "No," I admitted, "but it becomes part of you, like an old scar. You don't forget the pain, but you learn to live with it. And maybe you even learn from it." He nodded. Scars remind us we survived. Sophia, too, reminded me of that survival each time she updated me on the foundation. "The first scholarship has already been awarded," she told me with a grin. "A young girl from Providence. Her mother works 2 jobs. She wants to study law. She says she wants to fight for people like you." I laughed softly, a sound that felt strange at first, then natural. Good. The world needs more people willing to fight. I kept no framed photographs of Ethan or Clara in the house anymore. The walls bore new memories. A painting of the ocean Jack's grandson had made for me, a certificate of the foundation's establishment, and a simple wooden cross from a local church. I didn't need reminders of betrayal. I carried those within me, and they had already shaped me enough. The peace wasn't loud. It didn't come with celebration or applause. It was quiet, steady, like the tide. And maybe that's what made it real. I had stared into the abyss and chosen not to fall. Now, I chose peace. One morning, as the gulls cried overhead and the waves shimmered silver in the dawn, I whispered to myself, "This is home. This is mine." And nothing, no greed, no lies, no betrayal, will ever take it away again. The world outside still buzzed with scandals and greed, but within my walls, within my life, there was calm. And in that calm, there was strength. The sea outside my window was calm that evening, the kind of calm that comes not from silence, but from acceptance. I sat in my chair by the bay window, the same chair Robert once carved our initials into, and let the salt air brush against my face. The tide moved in rhythm, pulling back, surging forward, steady and eternal. For years, I believed family meant blood, that no matter how flawed, it was still family, but the ocean taught me differently. I whispered into the stillness, "Family is not bound by blood. Family is the ones who want you alive." The words carried weight, not because they were bitter, but because they were true. Ethan had been my only son. I had carried him, raised him, sacrificed for him, and yet, when greed gnawed at his soul, he chose wealth over blood. Clara? She never wanted me alive long enough to stand in her way. What they destroyed was not my fortune. It was the illusion I had clung to, that blood guaranteed love. The betrayal cut deeper than the cold Atlantic ever did. There are nights when I still hear Clara's voice, mocking me with that cruel smile. "Enjoy the waves, Grandma." And I see Ethan standing still, silent, as though watching me drown was easier than lifting his hand. That memory will never leave me. But pain is not the end of the story. I survived, and survival is more than breathing. Survival is reclaiming the right to live on your own terms, to refuse to be erased by those who profit from your silence. Justice had its day. Clara was sentenced, Ethan too. The law wrote its verdict and the community whispered its shame, but no sentence, no prison bars, could undo the fact that a mother was betrayed by her own child. That is the part the newspapers will never fully capture. That is the part only my heart will carry. And yet, as I sit here, I do not wish them dead. No, I wish them time. Time to sit with their choices, time to feel the silence of cold prison walls, time to understand the weight of what they threw away. Hatred would consume me if I let it. Forgiveness? That is not mine to give. What I choose is something quieter. Distance. A clean break. A new life they can never touch. Sophia told me once, "Emily, you don't just win in court. You win when you decide how to live after." She was right. That's why I gave a part of my estate to the community. That's why I let my story be told in the open, so others, other mothers, other grandparents, might see the warning signs I ignored. Jack still visits, bringing fish and laughter. Sophia still checks in, her pen scratching across fresh documents that secure futures beyond my own. The world did not end on that yacht. It began again, though in a way I never expected. There is a quiet lesson the ocean gave me. When the waves knocked me under, I thought I had no strength left. But the body remembers how to fight. The spirit remembers how to rise. You do not know how strong you are until the water tries to pull you under. I looked out at the horizon, the last light of day fading into a streak of gold. I will never drown again, I told myself. For those watching my story, perhaps you feel anger toward Clara, disgust toward Ethan, maybe even sadness at the thought of a mother abandoned. Good. You should feel all of it, because those emotions are proof you still hold love for the ones who raised you, proof you know right from wrong. Promise yourself, never and ever will you betray them. That promise is what keeps families whole. As for me, I found peace not by clinging to what was lost, but by embracing what remains. I am still here. I am still Emily Carter. I am not defined by the fortune they tried to steal, nor by the betrayal they carried out. I am defined by survival, by justice, by the quiet choice to live. The camera of life may pull back now, showing me as a small figure by the window, the sea stretching endlessly behind. Waves rise and fall, but the shore remains, and so do I.